Takashi was an ugly simp who was depressed and lonely all his life. However, when a zombie apocalypse breaks out, he is forced to crack zombies and freaky baddies to survive. On the day the world turned to a zombie buffet, Takashi skipped class to think about Rei, his childhood crush, who was dating his best friend, Hisashi. While the simping idiot was drowning in misery, he suddenly noticed a commotion at the gate. Some teachers were trying to shoo off a rando who was banging on the gate, and when the Giga Chad teacher tried to show off in front of his crush, the rando bit his hand like a hot dog. Everyone watched in horror as the injured teacher collapsed to the ground and died. While his work wife was crashing out because he promised to service her that afternoon, Bro suddenly resurrected and gave her a kiss of death. The horrific scene shook Takashi to his core, so he rushed back to class and pulled Rei out of her seat, saying they had to leave. Confused, Hisashi asked Takashi why he was trying to take his girl away. Takashi explained that the purge was happening outside, and if they didn't leave, they would be caught up in it. The next moment, Rei snatched her hand back and began nagging like a spoiled brat until Takashi shut her up with a slap. Hisashi simply watched the drama unfold, and a few moments later, the three of them left the class. Takashi suggested they arm themselves, but Hisashi claimed that with his Giga Chad looks, he wouldn't even have to show his black belt karate moves. Rei then tried to call her daddy, a police officer, but was shocked to learn that all the emergency lines were busy. Before the shock could wear off, a teacher's voice came through the public address system, urging the students to evacuate the school because violence had broken out. Suddenly, he went silent, and when his voice returned, he was screaming for help. The next second, all hell broke loose as the terrified students turned the hallways into Shibuya Crossing during rush hour. Seeing what was happening, Hisashi suggested to Takashi and Rei that they go out through the admin office, but upon getting outside, they ran into one of the infected teachers. He approached Rei like he wanted to get some, but the baddie had pent up anger issues and pulled a combo attack on the steep until she finally stabbed him in the heart. However, he kept moving, so she began wondering when she auditioned to be on The Walking Dead. As she struggled against him, Hisashi jumped on the guy from behind and pulled him away from Rei. Takashi quickly reminded him that handsome boys don't get plot armor in zombie movies, but Hisashi assured him that he'd be fine. Just then, the zombie did a 360 head spin and bit his arm. Takashi and Rei immediately tried to help him, but the zombie's hold on Hisashi was so strong that it refused to let go until Takashi smashed its head like a watermelon. The group then looked around and, when they saw the campus crawling with zombies, Hisashi proposed they go to the rooftop and hide until help arrived. However, when they arrived and saw the city on fire, they realized that help wasn't coming. Even the military helicopters which flew by didn't stop, and Takashi pointed out that it was probably because things were worse on the outside. Just then, they realized zombies had surrounded them, so Takashi suggested they fight their way to the top of the observatory and barricade themselves there for the time being. After fighting another zombie, they managed to barricade themselves, and as they waited, Hisashi started coughing up blood. Rei immediately rushed to his side and called out to Takashi to help, but Takashi didn't move as he finally realized the babe might have traded her brains for bigger airbags. Hisashi then said he wanted to die before he became an undead, but his sentimental girlfriend refused to let him go, as she deluded herself into believing he was fine. Even after he turned completely, she refused to leave his side and had to be pulled away by Takashi, who had no choice but to smash Hasahi's head in. As his lifeless body lay between them, the ungrateful Rei claimed Takashi had unalived her man because he was jealous they were dating. Instead of asking whether she had functioning brain cells, Bro decided to take his chances with the zombies and began trying to climb over the barricade. Upon seeing this, Rei quickly realized that she'd be cooked if he died, so she grabbed him and pleaded with him to stay with her. Feeling sorry for the broken-hearted girl, he came back down and hugged her tightly as she cried her heart out. Back inside, Takagi, who also happened to be Takashi's childhood friend, formed an unlikely alliance with a nerd named Hirano. As they ran for their lives, Hirano was scared that he'd be an easy target for the meat-loving zombies. However, Takagi told him to stop being a wimp because she wasn't ready to die yet. Back on the rooftop, Takashi and Rei sat in silence, but Takashi kept reliving the trauma of taking his best friend's life. When he jolted back to reality, he told Rei they needed to find out what was going on outside, so she asked for his phone to call her father, who was a policeman. When he picked up, she tried to ask for his help, but the man couldn't hear her because of the poor connection. As he was trying to tell them to evacuate somewhere, they heard a gunshot, and then the line went dead. For the second time that day, Rei cried and mourned her father, whose fate was now unknown. Back inside the building, as Takagi observed the zombies in the hallway they wanted to pass, Hirano asked if she had her cell phone because he wanted to call the police. Takagi wondered if it was the excessive fast food that made him so slow physically and mentally. She then pointed out that with everything going on, there was no way someone hadn't already tried to call the police. And since they hadn't shown up yet, it meant that the school wasn't the only place Dracula's distant relatives had invaded. While she was still explaining the gravity of the situation, a zombie suddenly appeared behind them, so they started running again. However, Takagi was totally annoyed that she was stuck with the spineless Fatso and not Takashi. Meanwhile, in the nurse's office, while a male student was bashing his friend's head in after the guy Frankensteined and tried to eat his brains, Marikawa, the school nurse, was casually gathering supplies. Unfortunately, the swarm of zombies at the door broke into the room and feasted wasted on the guy who got used before he could score any points with mommy milkers. As they prepared to make her their second course meal, a girl named Seiko arrived in time and cut them all down with her kendo practice sword. She then addressed the boy, thanking him for acting as a meat shield for Marikawa, after which she unalived him with his permission. Just then, more zombies broke into the room, so Seiko turned her attention to them. Meanwhile, Takagi and Hirano had reached the school workshop, where Takagi pulled out all the tools she could find and told Hirano to make a weapon out of them. As Hirano began putting the items together, the zombies began banging on the door, so Takagi urged him to hurry up before they die like side characters. When the zombies eventually broke through the door and tried to eat Takagi, Hirano began shooting them in the head with his makeshift machine nail gun. He then asked Takagi to grab the extra nails and drill for him, but the pompous princess complained that she wasn't his servant. In response, Hirano gave her a death glare, which he quickly changed to a smile as he added please to his request. Once all the zombies were dead, they moved to the hallway and began their journey as post-apocalyptic survivors. Back on the rooftop, the zombies broke through the barricade, so Takashi and Rei hosed them down to clear a path. However, they still had to fight a few more zombies to get back inside the school. Once they were safely in the stairwell, Takashi told Rei they would find a way off campus and head home, helping survivors along the way. Rei suggested that Takashi call ahead, but he told her that no one would answer since his dad lived elsewhere and his mother was at work. He also claimed that calling them individually would make them fuss, when the truth was that he was worried that they had been turned. On the other side of the building, where Takagi and Hirano were, Takagi confirmed that the zombies only reacted to sound by throwing a wet rag at a locker. As they watched the zombie bang against the locker, she deduced that the zombies were blind, which meant they could walk past them if they stood very quietly. When she told Hirano that they were leaving, the boy hesitated, voicing his reluctance to walk all the way to the city. So she told him that the calories he was about to burn were the least of her worries at the moment. Unfortunately, she'd spoken loudly, so all the zombies in that hallway began approaching them. Meanwhile, Seiko and Marikawa were in another hallway, and Marikawa was trying to convince Seiko to go to the faculty room. She said all the car keys were in there, so they had to go there at all costs. Seiko didn't say anything as she knocked the zombies they encountered out of the way instead of hitting a home run with their heads. Curious, Marikawa asked why she was doing that, and Seiko told her she wanted to avoid unnecessary fighting. Impressed by her reasoning, Marikawa tried to move forward, but she tripped over the carpet by the door. Seeing this, Seiko pointed out that Marikawa's clothes were unsuitable for running and cut her skirt open on the side. Marikawa didn't like this outfit alteration and began complaining, so Seiko told her not to be the cliché airhead. Just then, they heard a loud noise, and Seiko quickly deduced it was coming from the faculty room. Her deduction was correct, as Hirano was the one shooting nails at the zombies trying to attack him and Takagi. Unfortunately, Takagi wasn't of much help in that situation, and she kept complaining that she couldn't study the zombies if they were dead. Ignoring her rant, Hirano told Takagi to help him fight, but she refused, so he pointed out that there was a zombie behind her. Upon seeing the said zombie, Takagi screamed louder than you could ever make your girl scream, drawing the attention of Rei, Takashi, Seiko, and Marikawa, who were all nearby. Hirano tried to shoot the zombie, but his gun had run out of nails, so there was nothing he could do. Poor Takagi tripped over his bag in her attempt to back away. However, when the zombie moved towards her, she grabbed the drill gun that was lying on the floor next to her and drilled a hole in its head. Takashi and the others arrived just then, and they moved to eliminate the remaining zombies immediately. Once all the zombies were dead, Rie and Marikawa rushed to check up on the shell-shocked Takagi while Takashi secured the doors. Seeing as they were all in the same boat, Seiko introduced herself first, and the others followed suit. However, this annoyed Takagi. When she began lashing out at them for acting like they were at a tea party, Seiko placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her. She'd already deduced that Takagi was behaving that way because of the near-death experience she just had. In a matter of seconds, Takagi broke down into tears, so Seiko held her until she was all cried out. Later, they moved into the faculty room, and while Takagi washed all the blood away from her face, Marikawa searched for her car keys. However, Seiko pointed out that her car would be too small for their group and suggested that they take the school bus instead. As they began discussing where they would go after leaving school, Takagi noticed that Rei was focused on the television. When the others also noticed, they all turned their attention there and were shocked by the news. According to the reporter, the source of the outbreak was still unknown, and the number of infected was rising by the minute. She was in the middle of talking about what the government had to say about the situation when the police opened fire on the zombies in a body bag. As they watched, the reporter was attacked, so the broadcast was cut off and quickly replaced by a studio broadcast. The new report urged all those who were still uninfected to remain indoors until further notice, and this pissed Takashi off. He couldn't understand why the government wasn't saying more, and Takagi told him it was to avoid widespread panic. Turning their attention back to the television, they learned that the pandemic was worldwide and that none of the world's governments knew which step to take. The realization that it had only taken a few hours for the world to become a horror movie set shocked Rei to her core, and she sought comfort by Takashi's side. She also tried to delude herself into believing that things would return to normal soon, but Takagi told her to touch some grass. She then likened the outbreak to the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak, which which took the lives of around 50 million people. However, Marikawa argued that the situation was more similar to the 14th century Black Death, which wiped out more than one-third of Europe's population. Curious, Takashi asked how each one of those outbreaks ended, and Marikawa said that it was theorized that the spread stopped because there weren't enough people to transmit it. Her words prompted Harino to point out that they were all screwed because, unlike the other diseases, where the carriers were bedridden, the zombies were everywhere. Marikawa assured him that nature would take its course and the zombies would rot away, but Takagi told her not to use medical logic to follow the case. As far as she was concerned, the zombies might never decay since they were still moving even though they were already dead. Seiko then told them they had to leave the school first and find out whether their families were okay. They agreed to work together, and after gathering all their things, Takagi told them to head to the front doors, which were closer to the parking lot. To get there, they took down the zombies they encountered, but when they reached the stairs, Seiko advised them against unnecessary fights. Takagi also shared what she'd learned from observing the zombies, but a sudden scream cut her off. It came from another group of survivors, so they swooped in like the Avengers and saved them. Afterwards, they all proceeded to the front door, but since it was swarming with the undead, they hesitated to walk in their midst. Ultimately, Takashi volunteered to test out Takagi's theory that the zombies only reacted to sounds. Rei didn't support his decision and tried to stop him, but Seiko grabbed her before she could and told her to respect his wishes. Takashi approached the zombies with false bravado, and once he confirmed they couldn't see him, he relaxed a bit. He then picked up a shoe and tossed it in the opposite direction to draw their attention away from the front door. Unfortunately, as their group quietly rushed towards the bus, one of the boys they had saved accidentally hit the railing with his weapon. The sound was like a summoning call for all the zombies in the area, so Takashi screamed for everyone to run. As they ran for their lives, those with weapons fought off the zombies, allowing those without any to run ahead without worries. However, when one of the boys got caught, his girlfriend refused to leave him and rushed over to him. Takagi, who had been trying to stop her, couldn't help but wonder whether love always made people that stupid. Marikawa said she didn't blame the girl because, if she were in the girl's shoes, she would have done the same thing, as life without her lover would be meaningless. Always one to be logical, Takagi got mad and tried to argue, but a zombie who wanted to eat her face cut her off. Fortunately, Hirano saved her, but instead of thanking him, she blamed him for interrupting her speech. Takashi soon cleared the path to the bus and called for Marikawa to open it. Once she did, everyone got in, but just as they were about to shut the doors, another group of survivors called out to them to wait. Among them was a teacher named Shido, and for some reason, Rei told Takashi not to help the man. She claimed it would be in everyone's best interest if the man died, and while they argued over it, Shido guided the students with him to the bus. However, when one of them fell and sprained his ankle, Shido kicked the boy and told him that weak people had no place in the new world. He then got on the bus, and as soon as he shut the door, Marikawa drove off, knocking the zombies in her way down until they exited the school. As the bus moved, Shido expressed his gratitude and asked Seiko if she was the leader of her group. Seiko explained that they didn't have a leader because they were all working toward the same goal. Rei then assured Takashi that he would regret helping Shido, but before he could ask why, the city came into view. One of the boys from Shido's group started complaining, saying he didn't want to go back to the city. When another guy backed him up, Marikawa slammed the brakes and told them to shut up because she needed to concentrate on her driving. Seiko asked the guy where he wanted to go, and he told her that he didn't mind going anywhere as long as Takashi wasn't with them. Confused as to why the guy had beef with him, Takashi confronted him, but instead of responding, the guy tried to hit him. Rei quickly stepped in and schooled the guy, so Shido commended her for a job well done. However, the man had another agenda. He claimed they needed a leader and then nominated himself for the position because he liked to be in control. The students who came with him agreed to his becoming their leader, and this annoyed Rei so much that she got off the bus. When Takashi asked her to return, she said she wanted nothing to do with Shido, and the two-faced snake told her that she was free to leave. Takashi immediately told him to shut up and chased after Rei, but as he tried to convince her to return, a bus filled with zombies sped towards them. Takashi moved Rei out of the way in time, but the bus trapped them inside the tunnel and caught fire. Seiko called out to them from the other side, asking if they were okay, and Takashi assured her they were. He also told her they could go on without them, but promised they would meet them at the Eastern Police Station the next day. As soon as Marikawa drove off, the flaming bus exploded, so Takashi and Rei had to Mission Impossible their way out of the tunnel in one piece. Before they could catch their breath, a zombie wearing a helmet attacked Takashi, so Rei knocked it out using a stone slab. She then helped him up, and together they went searching for the zombie's bike, which they drove towards the city. After driving for a while, Takashi parked the bike, and as they looked out into the city, Rei asked if he thought they could be rescued. Takashi told her no, explaining that with everything happening, no one would want to risk their necks for anyone. What he said was true, but Rei got angry and started complaining that he always said the wrong things at the wrong time. Just then, they heard the zombies coming, so Takashi drove off to avoid confronting them. Meanwhile, the bus carrying the others was stuck in traffic because the police had set up a roadblock and were checking all vehicles to ensure that infected persons didn't get in. Since their bus was moving at a snail's pace, Takagi predicted that it would be morning before they made it to the bridge. Just then, they heard gunshots as the police had gunned down some zombies nearby. The sound frightened two girls in the bus, so Shido, their personal lord and savior, came to comfort them. He assured them that they were safe and that no harm would come to them, and the girls believed him. At that time, Takashi and Rei were driving through a part of the city which was surprisingly deserted. As they began wondering where all the zombies had gone, Rei spotted a police cruiser and became excited. Unfortunately, when they got closer, they discovered that the officers were dead because Truck-kun had hit them. Takashi was prepared to go away, but Rei stubbornly insisted on searching the car for anything useful. Her search produced a gun, a baton, and handcuffs, so Takashi took the gun and the extra bullets. They then got back on the bike and drove to a gas station to refuel, only to discover that it was self-service, and Takashi didn't have any money on him. When he told Rei this, the girl started complaining about how incompetent he was, which pissed him off. He apologized for not being as perfect as Hasashi, and Rei grew annoyed that he'd mentioned her dead boyfriend. They argued for a few more seconds until Takashi got fed up and asked her for gas money. Not surprisingly, she also didn't have money on her, since they had left their belongings at school, so he asked her to wait while he went to rob the store. Rei did as he asked, but some creep suddenly grabbed her from behind and put a knife to her neck, so she screamed. Takashi immediately abandoned his quest for cash and rushed outside to help her. He demanded that the guy let Rei go, but the guy refused, saying he needed a woman to survive the apocalypse. Shocked by his incel reasoning, Takashi asked if he was crazy, and the guy confirmed that he was since he had unalived his entire family after they turned into zombies. At that moment, Rei attempted to escape, but the thug caught her again and began manhandling her. He said the melon goddess had done a fine job bestowing her blessings on Rei and asked Takashi if he tasted them every night. When Takashi didn't respond, he started mocking him and touching Rei even more, so she cried out to Takashi to save her. He tried to approach them, but the thug threatened to stab Rei if he didn't drop his bat and fill up the bike. Takashi purposely tossed the bat away, and the sound of it hitting the ground attracted all the zombies in the area. He then began filling up the bike, and when he finished, the thug told him to leave, but Takashi refused and tried to talk the guy into releasing Rei. When that didn't work, he pulled out his newly acquired gun and charged at the guy. However, he didn't fire it, just pressed the nozzle against the guy's chest. Seeing this, the guy became afraid and asked whether he was willing to risk an explosion by shooting him. Takashi answered that it was a risk he was willing to take for his girl, and the next moment, he shot the guy. The pain forced the guy to let go of Rei, and as he knelt on the ground swearing profanities, Rei approached him with her weapon. She intended to take revenge for what he did to her, but Takashi told her not to waste her energy on a finished man. He also drew her attention to the approaching horde of zombies, so she got on the bike behind him. As they drove off, the thug begged them not to leave him, but his cries were ignored, and the zombies moved in on him. Hours later, the sun rose, and as Takashi and Rei continued their journey, Takashi warned Rei to be prepared to meet others like the thug. Rei nodded and placed her head against his back, unaware that he was feeling guilty about causing someone's death, even though the guy deserved it. Just then, a plane flew by, and Rei began waving at it because she felt like it. Meanwhile, at the airport, a plane was preparing to take off, but the runway was overrun with zombies. To solve the issue, a sniper team was deployed to eliminate them, and once they concluded their job, one of them radioed the control tower. His partner, Rika, then stood up and began taking off her bulletproof vest as she complained that her melons were getting suffocated. The guy offered to help massage them, but she told him he wasn't her type. Taking his rejection in stride, Bro switched topics to how the zombies had gotten into the offshore airport. Rika pointed out that one of the many high-ranking officials and their families who were granted entry was probably infected. As the plane took off, Rika told her partner that she was heading back to the city because she had a friend she wanted to check up on. This friend was Murakawa, and she was still stuck in traffic with Takagi and the others. While Shido was preaching to his loyal followers to pass the time, aboard Takagi, fed up with his lies, woke Hirano, asking how he could sleep peacefully in such a situation. Hirano told her there was nothing else he could do and added that they should have taken another route. Takagi pointed out that it wouldn't have mattered, and as she explained why, they spotted a plane. She immediately guessed it was headed to a heavily secured area, so Hirano suggested that they find a place like that and go there. She told him they couldn't and explained that places like that wouldn't accept newcomers, for fear they would bring the infection with them. In fact, their determination to survive would turn them into heartless beings willing to sacrifice anyone. A perfect example of that was Shido, who was currently brainwashing the other students with his lies. Takagi knew they couldn't trust him, and when she mentioned that she wished Takashi were still around, Hirano asked if she had a crush on the guy. She immediately tried to deny it, but froze when she noticed realized Marikawa and Seiko were standing behind her. Fortunately, the two didn't say anything about her crush, and Seiko said she was worried about Takashi and Rei. Speaking of Takashi and Rei, they encountered a group of people attacking zombies for fun. Not wanting to get mixed up with them, Takashi sped up and began maneuvering the bike when the people tried to attack them. Once they were safely through, Rei asked why they had been shooting at them, and Takashi told her it was because they had gone crazy. He then continued driving, but instead of heading towards the bridge, he drove in the opposite direction. Confused, Rei questioned why he had done it, so he stopped and asked her to look at the crowded bridge before explaining that they would have to find another way to cross. At that time, Shido's preaching had gotten to the point where Takagi and the others couldn't stand him anymore, so they began talking to themselves about their families. Ultimately, the conversation shifted to whether or not they wanted to continue rolling with Shido and his newly brainwashed cult, and they agreed they didn't want to. Shido seemed to know what they were saying, so he called out to them and tried to convince them that working together was the only option, but Takagi told him they weren't interested. He then said they were all free to leave, except for Marikawa, because his group would need her medical expertise in case of an emergency. As he began approaching them, Hirano shot at him, ensuring that the nail only grazed his cheek. Shido couldn't believe what happened and tried to pull the "this isn't you" card with Hirano, but Hirano told the good-for-nothing scoundrel to shut up. It so happened that Shido had manipulated some of the students into bullying Hirano for years, but he endured it because there was nothing he could do. However, now that the world had turned upside down, he could very well send the manipulative son of a gun to the pearly gates, and no one would bat an eye. Seeing how serious Hirano was, Shido backed away in fear and could only grind his teeth in annoyance as Marikawa left with Hirano's group. Meanwhile, Takashi and Rei arrived at another bridge, and when they saw it was also blocked, Takashi tried to think of another route. Just then, they heard what sounded like gunshots, but Takashi quickly realized that it was the sound of Hirano's nail gun. Their friends were currently fighting off a horde of zombies, so Takashi drove over there to help them. After dropping Rei off with Seiko, he drove to where Hirano was and tossed his gun to him. Hirano easily caught it and double-tapped the zombies in front of him. Takashi then used the bike to knock the remaining zombies off the bridge, claiming victory for their group. Seeing that they were all safe, Rei jumped into Marikawa's arms, trying to hug her, but got a face full of melons instead. Seiko then began talking to Takashi, which annoyed Ri and Takagi, who complained that he was ignoring her. On the other hand, Hirano was too busy geeking out over the gun Takashi was giving him to welcome his friends back. A little while later, as they all stood by the riverbank thinking about their next step, Marikawa suggested they go to her friend's place, which was close by, and crash there for the night. Takagi asked if this friend was her boyfriend, and Marikawa quickly explained that her friend was a female. She explained that the girl was always traveling for work, so she'd given her a spare key and permission to use the place whenever she wanted. She also said that her friend owned a truck which they could use to transport themselves the next day, so they agreed to go there. When they arrived at the place, Hirano was shocked and happy to see that the truck Marikawa had mentioned was a military-grade Humvee. This prompted Takagi to ask what kind of work Marikawa's friend did, but the woman didn't respond. Just then, they noticed some zombies approaching, so they charged at them and cleared the path to the apartment. Once they were safely inside, Marikawa and the girls went to bathe, and Rei couldn't stop gawking at Marikawa's milkshakes. She then shamelessly began trying to touch them, so Marikawa attempted to get away. Their screeching annoyed Takagi, but as she began complaining about it, Seiko hosed her down to cool her temper, and in return, she dumped cold water on her back. While all that was happening in the bathroom, Takashi and Hirano were busy trying to break into the locker they found. When they finally succeeded, Takashi was shocked to find high-grade rifles sitting pretty in there, but Hirano was over the moon. Bro knew which rifle was which and its specifics, and as he geeked out about them, the confused Takashi checked the locker again and found a shotgun. Once again, Hirano began geeking out over the gun, telling Takashi where it was made and how powerful it was. However, when Takashi pointed it at him, he panicked and told Takashi never to point a gun at anyone unless it was an undead. Takashi knew he was right, but with the way things were going, they silently agreed that they would have to turn their weapons against other people. Eventually, they sat down and began loading the guns, and Takashi asked Hirano if he'd learned to load clips by using air guns. Hirano smirked and revealed that he knew how to handle real guns, which shocked Takashi because he'd assumed Hirano was just one of those nerdy gun enthusiasts. Hirano explained that when he visited America, he was trained by an ex-Delta Force captain for a month. The shocked Takashi could only thank the plot gods for putting Hirano in his group. He then looked at the guns spread before them and wondered what kind of person Marikawa's friend was, since all those guns were illegal. Hirano said that Marikawa had mentioned that her friend was part of the special assault team. However, he believed she either had filthy rich parents or was involved in some shady business to be able to afford a crib like that. Back in the bathroom, the girls were having the time of their lives, and their screams made Hirano say they were being noisy. Takashi, who was standing out on the balcony observing the bridge with binoculars, assured him that their voices wouldn't attract the zombies because the noise on the bridge was louder. The blockade was making the people anxious, and the police were finding it harder to keep things orderly. The captain tried to call for backup, but learned that all communications with headquarters had been cut off. The last order that all the units had received received from them was that they could use whatever means they wanted to maintain order. When he told this to his subordinate, the guy said they had no choice but to sacrifice some people for the greater good, and the captain became conflicted. From the balcony, Takashi could see zombies attacking people stuck at the back of the traffic jam. He then passed the binoculars over to Hirano so he could see what he was seeing and walked inside. When Hirano noticed a group protesting and some reporters on the scene, he asked Takashi to turn on the television, which he did. According to the reports, the protesters were blaming the outbreak on the government, saying it was a biological weapon that they co-developed with the American government. Takashi felt the people were grasping at straws because science couldn't explain what was happening, and Hirano said their leader must have played one too many video games. Just then, police on the bridge opened fire on the zombies, trying to push them back, but stopped when they spotted a desperate mother seeking help for her infected daughter. When the daughter bit her mother, one of the officers shot the woman down, but the protesters misinterpreted his actions. Their leader claimed the police were hurting innocent civilians and began rallying his people to raise their voices against injustice. Seeing this, the captain approached the group and calmly asked them to leave because they were causing a nuisance, but the leader accused the man of trying to silence the truth on behalf of the government. As he began riling up his group again, the captain pulled out his gun and shot him dead, shocking everyone. Shortly after that, the live feed was cut off, and the worried Takashi proposed that they get the girls and leave. Hirano told him it wouldn't be a good idea since it was too dark for them to see clearly. Just then, a drunk Marikawa latched onto Takashi from behind and tried to see if his gun was loaded, but he stopped her, so she kissed his cheek instead. Shocked, he tried to push her away, but unintentionally grabbed her plots, causing her to make happy sounds. Takashi quickly removed his hands and apologized, but Marikawa told him not to worry before shifting her attention to Hirano. The moment she kissed his cheek, blood rushed to his head and exited his body through his nose, causing him to pass out almost immediately. Marikawa seemed pleased with what she'd done, and when Takashi tried to caution her, she passed out in his arms. Surprisingly, Hirano had woken up and escaped to the balcony to calm himself, so Takashi asked him to be on the lookout before heading downstairs with Marikawa. On his way, he bumped into Rei, who he discovered was also drunk when she started talking nonsense. Eventually, her nonsense turned into worry about her father, and the next moment, she started crying. A little while later, after Takashi successfully put Marikawa to sleep, he went to the kitchen to look for a snack and found Seiko cooking. The girl was putting on only an apron, which left little to the imagination, so he screamed in shock and moved back. Realizing that her outfit was the cause of his reaction, she explained that she put all their clothes in the washing machine. As he was trying not to ogle her shamelessly, Rei, who was sitting on the stairs, called for him to come to her, so he did. However, when she started talking about Hisashi and comparing Takashi to him, Takashi got pissed. He angrily told her to stop doing that and let the dead rest, as he would never be like Hisashi. Mid-rant, he admitted that he felt guilty about unaliving Hisashi, and every time she brought him up, he was reminded of it. Suddenly, Rei moved closer to him, trying to kiss him, and Takashi didn't even resist. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the police officers ordered a bulldozer operator to push everyone and everything behind the barricade back. As the people tried to flee, the captain became overwhelmed with guilt and shot himself in the head. Back at the house, Takashi came to his senses and tried to stop Ri from kissing him, but she just laughed. Just then, they heard a dog barking outside, so he rushed upstairs to see what was happening. Hirano quickly signaled for him to be quiet, and that was when he saw that the streets were crawling with the zombies the bulldozer had pushed back. They watched as people tried and failed to fight off the zombies, and Takashi concluded that things had gotten worse. Seiko soon joined them, and when they noticed a young guy about to be eaten, Takashi tried to save him. Hirano immediately called out to him to stop, and Seiko pointed out that if he fired his gun, he would give away their location. She then went to turn off all the lights, explaining that keeping them on would only attract the living to them, and unfortunately, they were in no position to help anyone. When Takashi didn't say anything, she handed the binoculars back to him and advised him to get used to being the bad guy because the world was changing. Before she disappeared downstairs, he told her that he thought she was different, and Seiko replied that not everyone could be like Luffy. Takashi then returned outside and used the binoculars to observe what was happening. He felt bad each time he saw someone get eaten, but knew there was nothing he could do. Just then, he spotted a father and daughter seeking refuge in a house with all the lights on. The people didn't want to help them, so the father begged them to take only his daughter, and when they still refused, he threatened to break down the door. Surprisingly, this got the people to open the door, but instead of letting them in, they stabbed the father in the stomach. As the door closed, the man stumbled back into the yard and collapsed on the ground, so his daughter ran to him. Despite knowing he was dying, the man assured his daughter that he was fine and promised her that everything would be alright. He then used his dying breath to ask her to hide, but the girl started crying and begging him not to leave her. Her gut-wrenching sobs drew the zombies to her, and when Takashi saw this, he tried not to look. However, Hirano suddenly started sniping the zombies with his rifle, allowing the girl to find a place to hide. The dog, which had been barking the whole time, also rushed to where she was and tried to protect her. Seeing this, Takashi asked Hirano why he'd gone against his no-shooting rule, and Hirano said that only a heartless person would watch a young girl get eaten. He then told Takashi to get the girl, promising to provide cover from the balcony, so Takashi rushed off. When he got downstairs and told Rei where he was going, she insisted on going with him, but he refused, saying he didn't need a sidekick. Rei tried to argue, but Seiko told her not to bother and promised Takashi they would guard the house until he returned. Seeing as there was nothing she could do to convince Takashi, Rei handed him the revolver for extra protection. After that, he got on his bike and zoomed out of the compound as soon as the girls opened the gates, drawing the attention of all the zombies in the area. Takaji also woke up and came outside to find out what all the ruckus was about, and Rei told her that they had rediscovered their humanity. As promised, Hirano provided support from the balcony, but when Takashi reached the girl, he had a little accident. Despite this, he quickly got up and rushed to save the girl, who was crying in the corner for her parents. He smashed all the zombies using a crowbar, and when one tried to sneak up on him, he put his gun in its mouth and shot it dead. Back at the house, Takagi woke Marikawa and told Hirano to get ready to move, since they couldn't remain there after causing such a commotion. Hirano barely heard what she said because he was busy fighting for his life after seeing Marikawa in her birthday suit. After grabbing their things, Takagi and Marikawa went outside, and it was then that Takagi finally noticed the woman was unclad. She immediately told her to put something on, and while she did, she spoke with Rei and Seiko about their next move. Seiko said that since all the zombies were concentrating on Takashi, they could easily load up the car. However, they would have to drive to where Takashi was since he couldn't drive the bike back to them. While the girls were discussing this, Takashi helped the little girl pay her last respects to her father and allowed her cry to her heart's content. Back at the house, the girls finished loading everything they needed into the Humvee and signaled Hirano to come down. While packing up his things, Hirano looked down and was impressed to see Takashi using the fence as his escape route. The girl was on his back, and the dog was stashed away safely in his shirt, and Bro kept praying that his plot armor wouldn't fail him. As they continued moving, the girl suddenly told him that she needed to pee, and that was when Takashi knew that someone in the universe disliked him. He asked her to hold it in until they reached a safe spot, but she said she couldn't, so he had no choice but to tell her to let it go. As soon as she did, he tried moving again, but a zombie grabbed his foot and almost pulled them down. Takashi quickly took a few steps back, and after kicking it, he began looking around for another way out. Just then, the Humvee came speeding towards them, with Seiko and Harino on top, ready for action. When they got to where Takashi was, Seiko jumped down and began smashing heads, while Soj King Hirano opened fire on Takaji's command. Takashi thought they were crazy, but he was also glad they showed up and ran towards them. Once he'd safely jumped onto the truck, Marikawa sped off and didn't stop driving even as the sun came up. Meanwhile, aboard Air Force One, the First Lady of the United States and some other high-ranking officials who had turned into zombies were being shot at by the Secret Service. In another room, the Vice President was trying to convince the President to enter the nuclear codes and issue the order to launch the missiles. He believed that if they struck first, they could protect their country from future attacks by other countries looking to take advantage of the pandemic. Since he and the President had both been bitten, he urged the President to enter the code as it would be their last act of service to their people. Just then, he started coughing up blood, so he asked someone to put him out of his misery before he turned. Back in Japan, Takashi's group used the truck to cross the river because it was amphibious. During the crossing, Takaji kept guard. Hirano entertained the little girl, whose name they learned was Alice, while Takashi and the others slept. As they were about to reach the other side, Marikawa called out to the three sleeping beauties to wake up. However, only Rei heard her. The girl then took a few moments to admire Takashi, but when she noticed how peaceful Seiko looked as she slept on his lap, she became jealous and pinched him. Takashi jolted awake and asked what he'd done to deserve that, but became shocked when he noticed Seiko on his lap. His sudden yelp made her raise her head, and as she looked around in confusion, Rei told her that she was drooling, which made her feel embarrassed. Eventually, they all got out of the Humvee, and while the girls were tending to Alice, Takashi and Hirano had a chat. Hirano told Takashi that he'd learned from Alice that her mother was supposed to meet up with her and her father, but she never showed up. The boys were convinced the woman had been turned and agreed to take care of Alice from now on. Just then, they heard Marikawa announce that she'd taken clothes from Rika's place and asked the girls to pick whatever they wanted. As they began selecting clothes, Hirano tried to convince Takashi to peek at them, but he told the cultured idiot to knock it off. The dog also started barking, as if he understood what Hirano had said, so Takashi picked him up and told him to stop. While he was still holding the dog, whom Hirano had named Zeke, Hirano handed him the shotgun they had found in the locker. Takashi didn't want to take it because he didn't know how to use it, but Hirano insisted and demonstrated how he could use it. However, Takashi got confused since learning wasn't his strong suit, so Hirano told him just to keep the gun and use it as a bat instead. At that moment, the girls finished changing, and seeing as they were rocking post-apocalyptic chic, the boys took their time admiring them. When asked if they liked what they saw, Takashi told her he was more concerned about whether she knew how to use a gun. Rai admitted that she didn't know how, so Hirano told her that the rifle was equipped with a military bayonet which she could use as a spear. Just then, Takagi called out to the boys, asking them to go up to the road and scout the area. The boys did as they were told, and once they confirmed that the coast was clear, they signaled Marikawa to drive up. Once they were all gathered, Takashi suggested that they head to Takagi's home first, but warned her not to get her hopes up. As they drove there, Rei, who was sitting on the truck's roof with Takashi, pointed out that they hadn't spotted any zombies since they arrived, and Takashi agreed that it was strange. The drive continued peacefully for a few more minutes until Hirano spotted some zombies ahead and alerted the group. Mirakawa quickly swerved in another direction, like Lewis Hamilton, but that road was also swarming with zombies, which got knocked down one by one like bowling pins as the truck sped through. Just then, Rei cried out for Marikawa to hit the brakes because there was a wire fence up ahead. Marikawa turned the steering wheel, crushing the zombies against the wire, and when she hit the brakes, Rai was sent flying off the roof and onto the curb. Takashi, seeing that his beloved was about to be attacked, suddenly jumped off the truck and shot at one of the zombies. Not surprisingly, his aim was off, and the recoil pushed him back, so Hirano called out to him, instructing him to hold the gun steady and aim. Takashi did as he was told and hit his targets, so he continued doing that until he ran out of shells. When he attempted to reload, he dropped the shells, so Seiko and Hirano offered their assistance. Despite this, Bro still couldn't pick up the shells, so when the zombies began closing in on him and Rei, he turned and held her against himself. This action drew his attention to the gun strapped to her body, so he maneuvered her to act as a rifle stand and asked Hirano for instructions on how to use it. Hirano gave him a brief run-through without pausing his assault on the zombies, and surprisingly, Takashi got the hang of it. For every shot he took, Rei's pillows absorbed the recoil effects, but Takashi was too focused to notice the glorious ripple. At some point, Marikawa tried to start the truck and get them out of there, but it wouldn't start. Seeing this, Takagi decided to stop being a wimp and stepped out of the truck to help her friends. However, she almost got bitten and had to be saved by Seiko before she managed to grab Takashi's shotgun and reload it. For the next few minutes, the group, including Zeke, engaged the zombies, but when they ran out of bullets and the zombies kept coming, they realized they were going to die. Hoping to avoid that, Takashi and Seiko tried to lure the zombies away, but only a few followed them. As Takashi tried to draw the zombies' attention, Hirano lifted Alice out of the truck and told her she had to go ahead with Zeke for the time being. He assured her that he and the others would follow suit shortly, but Alice didn't believe him. She pointed out that her father had also lied to her before he died, and said she'd rather die with them than lose them, as she had lost her father. Her cries made Hirano feel bad, but he was determined to ensure that she survived, so he tried to throw her over the wire fence. However, the next moment, a group of people dressed as firefighters arrived and took over the scene. After pushing the zombies back with air pressure cannons, they helped Hirano and the girls cross over the fence. Once everyone was safe, Mirakawa thanked their helpers, and the leader told her that it was the least she could do for her daughter and her friends. After saying this, she took off her helmet, and that was when Takagi realized that it was her mother, so she ran to hug her. Seeing that their friends were safe, Takashi told Marikawa that he knew another way to get to Takagi's house and began leading her there. When the group saw them leave, Takagi shouted that they would be waiting for their arrival. Takashi and Seiko ran for a while, then changed direction when they encountered some zombies. Takagi's house was in their sights, but it was still too far for them to reach on foot, so Takashi decided to get a bike. They broke into one of the bike stores they passed earlier that day and, after looking around for a while, found a buggy with amphibious capabilities. Takashi fell in love with it the moment he saw it, and Seiko saw no reason why they shouldn't take it. After leaving the store, they were chased down a slope to the riverbank by the zombies. Unfortunately, tumbling down the slope wasn't enough to stop the zombies, so Takashi drove the buggy into the water to avoid them. When he turned around to check on Seiko, he was shocked to see that her shirt had been soaked through. However, he didn't try to avert his gaze because it was his first time seeing a sight so captivating, and when Seiko realized what he was doing, she quickly covered her chest and scolded him. A few minutes after they got in the water, they noticed the zombies walking away, so Takashi sighed in relief. Seiko then moved closer to whisper something in his ear, but he yelped in surprise at her sudden closeness, so she cautioned him to be quiet. After that, he drove the buggy to the sandbank in the middle of the river, and Seiko suggested that they rest there for a while. Takashi agreed to take first watch while she slept, but the next moment she sneezed, so he pulled out his vest and gave it to her to change into. When she was finished, she told him that he could turn around, and Bro almost had a seizure because of how well the vest outlined her plots. Seiko noticed his reaction and teased him, saying she knew he wanted to crack her. Takashi tried denying it, but he could only stutter like an idiot, so he decided to shut up. A few moments later, he asked her whether there was someone she liked. Seiko told him there was, but she didn't offer any further explanation and suggested they head back. Takashi didn't question why she suddenly changed her mind about resting and drove the buggy back to the city. The sound immediately attracted attracted the zombies to them, but Takashi kept going until he crashed into a fountain. As expected, Seiko got wet again, and when she complained, he smiled and asked her to get the tape from his backpack. He used it to rig the buggy to keep circling the fountain, drawing the attention of all the zombies in the vicinity. Seiko then began whacking zombies to clear a path for them, but when she encountered two young ones, she hesitated to attack them. Seeing this, Takashi rushed over and took matters into his hands before grabbing her and rushing off. They ended up in a shrine, and after locking the doors, Takashi asked Seiko why she'd suddenly lost her mojo out there. Seiko dropped to her knees, and when she didn't speak for a while, he told her that they would spend the night at the shrine. He then lit a candle and, after looking around, found a real sword, which he presented to Seiko along with her clothes, before standing by so she could change. When she finished, he came back out, sat down opposite her, and handed her a sealed bag. He whispered that it was the only disposable toilet they had, and Seiko couldn't help but laugh at how serious he was being about it. That moment seemed to reduce the tension in the room, but Seiko was still a bit reserved when she asked Takashi whether he was still interested in hearing why she froze. He assumed it was because of the young zombies, but she said that moment had only reminded her of something from her past. She then began her story by telling him that the reason she never confessed her feelings to the guy she liked was that she didn't think he'd want anything to do with a murderer. Apparently, 4 years ago, while she was on her way home, she was attacked by a guy hoping to get fresh with her, so she fought him off with her training sword. By the time the police arrived, he had a few broken bones, but they didn't fault her and drove her home in their patrol car. Seiko admitted that she'd enjoyed every second she spent beating her attacker up, and said that the real her was a sick and twisted person who ought to be sitting pretty in a room at Arkham. As far as she was concerned, someone like her didn't deserve something as pure as love, but Takashi disagreed. He tried to justify her actions by saying he had done questionable things since the zombie apocalypse began. Seiko told him not to compare their situations, because whereas he had been forced to do those things, she had always been that way. The incident at the water fountain had reminded her of that fact, and she realized that because of the current situation, she had become even worse than before. As soon as she said this, Takashi grabbed her hand, causing her to stop whatever she was going to say next. The two then stared at each other for a while before Takashi leaned in to kiss her. The next morning, when they tried to continue their journey to Takagi's house, they were suddenly surrounded by zombies. Takashi immediately asked Seiko to run away, but she just stood there, acting all shy and vulnerable. Realizing what the problem was, Takashi moved behind her and roughly grabbed her melons because he was that kind of guy. He then told her that he would give her a reason to move, since she seemed to have lost all her motivation overnight. Additionally, he said that it didn't matter how tainted she was because, to him, she would always be the coolest girl he knew, and he didn't want her to die just yet. To round off his motivational speech, he encouraged her to embrace her dark side and bear her sins like the baddie that she was. Moved by his words, Seiko thanked Takashi and then went all Tanjiro on the zombies. With every slash of her blade, the smile on her face grew more crazed, showing that she had embraced who she was. Once all the zombies were dealt with, Takashi began leading her to Takaji's house, but she called out to him to stop. She then grabbed his hand to ask if he would take responsibility for her, and Takashi smiled, assuring her that he would. A little while later, they arrived at Takaji's house, looking more chummy than before, and when Takaji noticed this from the window, her smile disappeared. Alice, Zeke, and Hirano were the only ones who ran out to welcome them. Rei was a no-show because she was recovering, and after Takashi changed clothes, he helped Marikawa hold her down so she could apply ointment to her body. When she finished, Rei accused Takashi of being a traitor and told him to get out of her room, which confused him, so he questioned why. Rei answered with a mixture of embarrassment that she wanted to put ointment on her plots since they hurt because he'd used them as a stand. As soon as the words left her mouth, Takashi ran out of the room and down the stairs like he was being chased. As he stood there, he noticed some workers trying to carry a heavy box and tried to help them, but the men told him to leave all the hard work to the real adults. After they walked off, Seiko approached him, and when he saw that she was dressed in a kimono, he was awestruck. However, when he complimented her, things got a bit awkward, and just as they were laughing it off, Alice and Zeke wandered in. The young girl wanted in on the joke, and Takashi told her that they were discussing how happy they were to see her again. Just then, they heard Takaji's angry voice coming from one of the rooms, and when she appeared in the hallway, Takashi asked what the problem was. Instead of answering his question, she scolded him, but said she was glad to see that he was okay. As she walked away, her mother appeared in the hallway and asked Takashi to spare her a few moments to talk to him about Takaji. Meanwhile, Takaji went to the garage where Hirano was holed up cleaning his guns. She told him to enjoy the moment while it lasted because they would have to leave sooner or later. Hirano didn't understand why they had to leave a perfectly fortified place, so she tried to explain how things were being run. At the same time, her mother was also explaining things to Takashi. She revealed that after the outbreak began, the defense minister dispatched forces to the power plants to keep them running. However, they can't do it alone, so she intended to take those willing to fight, along with their families, to the plant in 2 days. Back in the garage, Hirano was told by Takaji's family's mechanic that he shouldn't be playing with guns. He didn't notice Takagi until she spoke, and she dismissed him after he told her that he'd fixed their truck. Hirano was impressed by how the man had treated her, but Takagi told him to stop being naive. She pointed out that the man had told him to stop playing with guns because he didn't think he was mature enough. She then said everyone there thought they were immature, so they needed to speak to the others about the next step. Inside the house, Takashi was walking to his room, but he was trying to figure out how to speak to Takagi. Her mother had told him that Takagi opposed moving to the power plant, and she hoped he could get her to change her mind. A little while later, the gang gathered in Rei's room at Takagi's insistence, and she told them they needed to decide whether or not to stay with her family. Takashi said they would benefit more by staying, since her parents had everything under control. Takagi agreed that what her parents had done to ensure the safety of their people was impressive. However, she couldn't forgive them for not trying to find her, even though they had the resources. As far as she was concerned, they didn't believe she was capable of surviving and had given up on her from the start. Hearing her talk like that angered Takashi, so he hoisted her by the shirt and told her to at least be grateful that her parents were safe, unlike the rest of them, who had no idea whether their families were alive. No one said anything after his outburst, and after a few more moments of silence, Takagi asked him to put her down, assuring him that she understood his point. Takashi did as she asked, and as she tried to continue the meeting, she was cut off by the sound of trucks pulling into the estate. Immediately, they rushed outside to see what was happening and were left in awe as Takagi's father stepped out of one of the cars that had arrived with the trucks. He had brought back one of his men who had turned into a zombie while trying to rescue those in need, and asked everyone to look at him. He told them that although the man had sacrificed himself for them, he was now a threat, so as the head of the family, he had to put him down. At that moment, the cage was unlocked, and the zombie charged at him, but he stood his ground and sliced its head off cleanly. As the head floated in the water, Takagi's father told the crowd that they all had to be prepared to take a life, even though the life they were taking once belonged to someone close to them. After giving them that harsh reality check, he walked away with his wife, and Takashi heard Hirano muttering angrily to himself. When he asked what the problem was, Hirano shouted that swords weren't efficient enough because they became unusable after being used at least 3 times. Seiko told him that his assumption was wrong and explained that a sword was only as good as its wielder, but Hirano disagreed. When he tried to argue, Takashi attempted to calm him down, but Hirano lashed out at him and ran off after Takagi told him to chill out. Takashi immediately went after him, but Hirano managed to slip away, and just as he was about to punch the wall, Alice came to him. She told him that he needed to patch things up with Hirano, but Takashi didn't think that Hirano would want to speak with him. Alice assured him that Hirano would listen if they talked calmly, and then rushed off to find Hirano. Now alone, Takashi thought back to when their history teacher told them about a crew that had mutinied against their captain because they had become too relaxed after spending time on an island. He then began to wonder whether Takagi was right about leaving the estate, but before he could conclude, Alice came running to find him. She told him that Hirano was in trouble and needed his help, and Takashi became worried. It turned out that Hirano was being harassed by some workers who wanted to take his guns away. They told him he shouldn't be handling such dangerous weapons since he wasn't an adult, but Hirano assured them that he knew more about guns than any of them ever could. Just as they tried to take the guns forcefully, Takagi's parents arrived, and her father demanded to know what all the commotion was about. His men explained that Hirano refused to surrender his guns, so he asked Hirano why. Hirano told him that he couldn't give up his guns because without them, he would return to being a spineless coward. He claimed they helped him find his purpose and usefulness in life, so Takagi's father asked what his so-called purpose was. Hirano tried to answer, but the words kept catching in his throat, so Takashi, who just arrived, spoke for him. He said Hirano's purpose was to protect Takagi, and when the rest of the gang arrived, they backed up Takashi's statement. Takagi then looked her father in the eye and told him that Hirano was the one who protected her when he failed to do so as her father. At the same time, this confrontation was going on. One of Shido's disciples, who had somehow gotten into the estate, called Shido and assured him that Takagi's parents would accept him and the others into their ranks. After getting off the call, Shido began preaching to his disciples again, and they looked even more brainwashed than before. Outside the bus, a boy whom he kicked out for talking back to him pounded on the door, begging to be let back in, but Shido ignored him, and the zombies ate him. Later on, at Takagi's family estate, she got into an argument with some of the people over what the outbreak was. The people didn't believe that dead people were walking around and eating normal people, and claimed it was just a new disease which would soon have a cure. Takagi told the ignorant fools to believe what they wanted and added that even the experts didn't know what had caused the outbreak. When she mentioned her father, the woman who had been arguing with her said they were trying to coerce them into believing that unaliving people were acceptable. She twisted everything, claiming that the upper class was just craving unnecessary violence, and the people agreed with her. As they began chanting that they were against all acts of violence, Takagi and the boys returned to the house. She was so pissed that she kept complaining and even tried to fight with Hirano when he said he understood where the people were coming from. Fortunately, Takashi stepped in and stopped her, allowing Hirano to explain what he meant. According to him, people only saw what they wanted to see, and even though they knew things were bad, they chose to delude themselves into believing otherwise. Takashi argued that the people were being stupid, but she finally understood what Hirano meant. Just then, Takashi muttered something, surprising Takashi and Hirano that he was actually listening to them. Takashi felt a bit embarrassed, but they kept teasing him, and when they said he had all the attributes to be their leader, he was surprised. Meanwhile, Takaji's father was speaking to Seiko in his private quarters, and he gifted her a double-edged sword, which he said was his way of showing appreciation to her father, who was once his sword master. Seiko didn't want to accept the gift because she didn't think she deserved it, and said she would pass it on to her father when she saw him. Her words made the man laugh, as he'd expected nothing less from her. He then admitted that he'd given her the sword as a token of appreciation for helping his daughter, so she suggested that the man give the sword to Takashi since he was their leader. Takaji's father agreed that Takashi was a fine young man. However, he believed that he was too soft-hearted and would hesitate when he ought not to. At that time, Takashi had returned to his room, and as he was thinking about what made Hirano and Takaji call him their leader, Rei interrupted him. She explained that everyone was looking up to him because he had shown leadership traits right from the start, the way he handled things at school. Takashi argued that he'd done those things out of desperation and said that they had only survived because of the combined efforts of everyone. As their conversation continued, Rei suddenly leaned against him and began talking about how girls only like cute guys who treated them right. Takashi pointed out that he didn't fall into those categories, and she agreed. However, she admitted that the outbreak had allowed her to see all his good qualities that she'd ignored in the past. Somehow, she was now sitting on his lap, and when she looked up at him, she told him that she wanted nothing more than to be with him. She also said she wouldn't mind sharing him if he fell for someone else, and when she placed his hand on her plots, he flipped her onto the bed. As he hovered above her, he admitted that he didn't know whether to be happy or annoyed by her sudden confession. He then leaned forward, but she winced from pain, so he got off her and apologized. Rei told him not to worry and said she would look for Marikawa to check her bruises, but her final words to him were that he consider her confession. Later, Takashi went to speak with Takaji's father, who told him he wanted to leave the estate to search for his mother and Rei's father. The man asked what he'd do once he found them, as they were moving to the power plant in 2 days. Takashi assured him that he would return before then, but said that if they didn't, he was free to leave without any worries. After saying this, he left to gather his things, and Rei came to give him some extra things he might need. While they were talking, Seiko showed up in her usual attire and told him that she was going with him. Takashi spent a few seconds ogling her, and Rei couldn't help but acknowledge that she looked good. As Seiko was explaining why Takashi had to let her come with him, Rei suddenly rushed outside with her gun's bayonet at the ready, which confused her friends. It turned out that she had sensed Shido's disgusting aura as he was being led to the house by the butler. He had let him in because Shido's father was a senator, and as he was singing the man's praise, Shido could only think about how wrong he was. Growing up, he watched everyone sing his father's praises, but they didn't know that behind the senator's smile lay a cruel dictator. He spent his free time abusing his family, and after his wife unsubscribed herself from life, Shido cut all ties with him and even changed his surname so he could enjoy his life as a teacher. However, one fateful day, his father called him up and ordered him to fail Rei because her father was investigating his corrupt practices. Shido had no problem doing what his father wanted because all those years of abuse had left him just as twisted as his father. Back in the present, Rei rushed to him and pointed her bayonet at him as she confronted him about her father and her grades. She said that after she failed, her father had apologized to her in tears, blaming himself for what happened. It didn't take long for her to figure out that Shido was behind her grade change, but she kept quiet for the sake of her father's investigation. However, now that none of those things mattered anymore, she could finally get back at him. When she pressed the bayonet against his cheek, the terrified man asked if she was truly prepared to become a murderer to restore her father's honor. His words only pissed Rei off even more, and as she screamed at him to shut up, Takaji's father came out and told her to unalive Shido. He said that she was free to do that since the law had been rendered useless by the pandemic. Takashi tried to go to Rei, but Seiko held him back, saying he had to let Rei decide by herself. No one else tried to intervene after she said this, and as they watched on, Shido began provoking Rei. Fortunately, she resisted the urge to hurt him, and as she began walking away, Takaji's father asked if she was sure about leaving Shido alive. Rei told him that she was, explaining that the man wasn't worth her time and energy. Hearing her say this annoyed Shido even more, but he couldn't do anything to help her, and in the end, he, along with his students, was kicked out because Takaji's father didn't want them infecting his people with their stupidity. Meanwhile, aboard a Russian submarine, the officers received orders to launch their missiles since America had done the same. The astronauts on the space station concluded that things would end badly because the other nations would surely follow suit. As they had predicted, the Japanese Navy soon learned of the missiles and launched its own. However, its mission was to counter the missiles from other nations. They only managed to take down 2 because zombies had overrun the ship that had taken down the last one. The missile exploded mid-air, close to the airport where Rika was, and as everyone began wondering what had happened, she cryptically told them that the nights were about to grow darker. Minutes before the missile strike, Marikawa excitedly told the gang that she had finally remembered Rika's phone number and asked for a phone to call her. Rika was happy to hear from her, but as she was trying to find out where Marikawa was, her phone suddenly began smoking. It was also the exact moment that the missile hit, and everyone began wondering whether they had just experienced the second Big Bang. Takagi, being the Einstein of the group, quickly figured it out and asked Rei to check whether her gun's sensors were working. Once Rei confirmed that they weren't, she immediately became worried because it confirmed her suspicion that an electromagnetic pulse had been released along with the blast. At that moment, her father's people were also trying to figure out why all their computers and other machines had suddenly powered down. The bus Shido was driving also used computers, so it crashed into the bulldozer, setting up the blockade. With the blockade destroyed, the zombies gained access to the protected area. Back at the estate, Takagi was explaining the situation to her friends, but all Marikawa picked from it was that she wouldn't be able to call Rika again. Takagi told her that making calls was the least of her worries, and as she was still speaking, her parents arrived. Her father asked if there was a way to get everything running again, and she told him that if they replaced the destroyed circuits of the cars and computers, they might turn on. The man immediately ordered his people to do so, and as he was commending Takagi for being a genius, the zombies arrived. Seeing this, he ordered the gates to be shut, even though he knew most of his people were outside the estate. Hirano gunned down the lone zombie that made it through, so the men looked at him with newfound respect. Soon, a servant came to bring Takagi's mother a gun, and after she took it, she ripped her skirt so she could move around properly. Takagi quickly blocked Hirano's view because he was drooling over the woman, but her mom didn't seem to mind as she offered the gun to Takagi. Takagi told her she didn't know how to use it and asked why she had it in the first place. Her mother explained that she'd taken an executive self-defense course back when she was trying to become the new Wolf of Wall Street, leaving the gang to imagine what she looked like back then. The woman asked Hirano to teach Takagi how to use the gun, and he assured her that he would. Just then, the zombies forced their way through the gates, so Takashi called out to everyone to fall back. The people in the camps weren't so lucky, as the zombies easily picked them off one by one. The ignorant woman who had been arguing with Takagi earlier tried to protect herself, but she was eventually overpowered and eaten. Takashi and the others fought the zombies at the house off, but had to pull back because they knew they were fighting a losing battle. They, along with the remaining survivors and Takagi's parents, convened on one of the top balconies, and as they stood there, the butler came with news. He said the neighboring area hadn't been overrun by zombies yet, so Takagi's father announced that they would go there. He urged all those who were willing to fight to join him, but Takagi voiced her disagreement. She believed they would be fine if they barricaded themselves in the house, but her father assured her that the zombies would easily get in, as they did with the gate. He then told Takashi to continue his mission to save his mother and Rei's father, after which he told Hirano to continue protecting Takagi with his life. When he mentioned that they would buy them time to leave, Takagi began complaining and trying to convince her father to agree with her idea of holing up in the house. When she started getting hysterical, her mother slapped her, and she immediately shut up. The woman told her that, although her father's decision seemed selfish, it was the best one they had, and she pleaded with her daughter to try to understand it. Takagi couldn't bring herself to say anything else after this, so her mother turned to Alice and asked the girl to always listen to her older siblings. She then ordered them to move out at the same time that her husband ordered his men to light up the zombies like it was the 4th of July. As they engaged the zombies, Takagi and the others rushed to the garage to get their truck, which fortunately hadn't been affected by the electromagnetic pulse. However, the mechanic told them that there were a few things he still needed to fix, so they promised to buy him time. Takashi, Seiko, Rei, and Hirano continued cutting down the zombies, and when some tried to attack Marikawa and Alice, Takagi came to their rescue. Rei also got caught up in a messy situation, but Takashi rescued her in the nick of time. Soon enough, the car was ready to go, so the gang quickly loaded in and tried to get the mechanic to come with them, but he refused, opting to stay behind and fight. Since they couldn't change his mind, Marikawa floored the gas and zoomed towards the front gate. They passed by Takagi's father on the way, but the man refused to look at the truck or his daughter. Once they were out of the estate, they kept going down the street, and when Marikawa noticed the bus blocking the path, she pulled a fast and furious move. Seiko almost got her head crushed because she was hanging out of the vehicle, but Takashi pulled her inside just in time. As they continued driving, Rei tried to comfort Takagi, but Hirano told her not to do that because she didn't need it. The others thought he was being too harsh, but Takagi took Hirano's side and assured them that she was doing fine. She then switched topics to the car, pointing out that the engine sounded off. Takashi said it didn't matter and told her to keep driving until the engine gave out. He promised that they would help her look for Rika after they found his mother and Rei's father. A little while later, their truck died in the middle of the highway, so they abandoned it and continued on foot, even though the place was crawling with zombies. Do you think Takashi and Rei's parents are still human, or have they been turned? Also, do you think Takashi would pick between Rei and Seiko, or would he start a harem with them? If you got this far, comment Z-Day, and also check out this next video right here.